Hi, my name is Carole Baskin, and I'm the founder and CEO of Big Cat Rescue. This is Cat Chat. Today, I am pre-recording the show because we have so many other things going on that I just could not do a live show this week. We have been traveling around the country, doing presentations at seminars and conferences, and we just did our big fly-in, which was really a wonderful opportunity to bring our supporters from all around the country to DC to meet their lawmakers, to ask them to support the Big Cats and Public Safety Protection Act. The pre-recorded segment that you're going to watch is an event that happened at the sanctuary. My husband, Howard Baskin, was presenting to some people from the Body Shop and their PR firm, the Bratskier Group, and also to 7 editors and journalists from health and beauty and fitness magazines that were on site all day, visiting with the cats, getting to know each other, getting to know the stories of the cats. It was a wonderful, wonderful day that we all spent together. It didn't end until 11 o'clock that night. So we wanted to share with you the presentation in full, including some of the kind of off-the-cuff moments that won't be in our formalized presentation that will be online as well. So I hope you enjoy the show, and if you have any suggestions or if you would like to be on the show, please let me know. Contact me at cat@bigcatrescue.org.
I brought no-nos. What you need, just raise your hand. Before we begin, let me tell you the story. As I said to a few of you, I was very disappointed when I picked you all up that you didn't recognize me from my appearance in Glamour magazine. But how this happened?
Wait, what is this?
Yeah, this is me right here. Yeah, Carole's just extra. I'm the star. What happened was we went to New York in December of 2004. Carole hates the cold, and so she bundles up, and of course every article of clothing she has is cat print. So she was wearing this faux, of course, faux coat and hat, and we were going down Fifth Avenue, and we saw some guy taking pictures, didn't think anything of it. A few months later, one of our volunteers comes with Glamour magazine saying, "Isn't this Carole?" And we look, and sure enough, this is Carole. There's me. They were clever enough to cut off my head. And the caption here says, "Don't look like you're on the way to interview for the job of Jane and Tarzan." So Carole was the center don't here. So I thought, well, this might be an opportunity for a little more publicity. So I wrote them a letter. And in my letter, I said, your photographer did not realize that this was really her persona based on running the sanctuary. Well, and I explained that while our local magazines didn't have the standing of Glamour magazine, that we had been featured as in the local magazine as people of fashion, kind of as a joke, wearing our khakis. So this picture was in a local, lifestyle magazine. And I sent them a picture of Carole's closet. And I said, all of her clothes are like this. In fact, I'm afraid to walk in there at night. So I sent him this letter, really figuring nothing would come of it. And a few months later, I get a call from Glamour magazine saying, we had to edit your letter. Do you mind if we cut it down to this? Which I thought was very, very courteous of them. I wouldn't have expected the call. And I figured it would just be in letters of the editor. Instead, they gave us a whole column here with portions of my letter and the pictures. It's titled, "Hey, my wife is not a don't." And the funniest part of this is I only did this thinking, maybe we'd get a little more publicity by being in the letters to the editor. But I got calls from around the country, some from people I hadn't heard of in 20 years, saying, "You're so chivalrous. You were defending your wife." I didn't have a thought about defending my wife. But I didn't admit that to anybody.
Until now.
No, till now.
You just did do a bunch of reports.
Yeah, that was awful.
They're already blogging, Howard.
So what I'm going to, you've heard the cat stories, some of them today, and you understand how cats come here. I'm going to try to give you, in the next half hour, what I'll call the big picture of what's happening out there and what we call our advocacy work. Half of our mission, we have a two-part mission. One half is caring for the cats. The other half is trying to fix the problem. And that's something that makes us relatively unique in our field, because most of the sanctuaries are not as active. Well, none of them are as active, and few of them are particularly active, partly because many of them are struggling every day to feed the cats and don't have the resources to do that. And we've just managed ourselves differently as a conscious part of our strategy. So as far as the taking care of the cats, you're going to see some enrichment this afternoon, but I want to show you, this is a 90 seconds of some of the kind of things we try to do to make the cat's life more interesting. Because as Carole said, they're still in a cage, and these are intelligent, sentient animals that, the research continually shows they have a much greater range of emotions that are very close to ours. We see them experiencing sadness and depression and anxiety. And so we spend a lot of energy. She talked about the enrichment committee that comes every Wednesday, a lot of time trying to just make their life more interesting and fun. So that's all part of the cat care part. What we're going to talk about now is the other part, trying to stop these animals from being abused and abandoned, living in miserable conditions. And we've done a three-pronged effort to do that. One is that we have gone after specific abusers, like some of the cub petting exhibits, and I'll tell you about how we do that. The second one is trying to change the regulations, specifically to get the USDA to stop the cub petting. The cub petting is a huge part of the problem because these breeders are constantly breeding cubs. So if they have to cub to pet, they can only pet the cub for a limited period of time, and then the animals typically, if they live, get stuck in tiny cages, that I'll show you examples of.
Sorry, you mean cub petting, like literally they just bring cubs around so people can pay money to pet them?
Yes.
Okay.
And so they will bring them. There was one guy who particularly brought them to malls. It was set up on a Wednesday with these cubs, and the cubs are constantly, as long as there's customers, being petted, held for photo ops. There's a place here not far from us that lets you swim with cubs, and the reason they do that is because the cubs don't want to be held. And so they squeal and they wiggle and then they do all kinds of things to the cubs to get them to stop. If they throw them in a pool where they're afraid they're going to drown, none of that happens. So they have people swimming next to the cub. And, people go and do this and pay for it innocently, not realizing, and these people are good liars. They tell them this is doing something for conservation. It's actually the opposite. It's hurting efforts for conservation. And that comes from scientific studies. Changing the regulations and asking USDA to stop the cub petting has been a big part of our effort. And the third is a federal law to ban private breeding and possession. There's no reason to use these animals for entertainment or for people to have them as pets. And we'll talk about the fact that trying to regulate how they are kept just doesn't work. So these are the three efforts that we've been engaged in. I just talked about the problem with the cub petting. cubs are taken from their mothers immediately. I'm realizing I should have had my laptop here because I still look at the laptop screen. I have to turn to look at this, so I'm sorry to turn my back on you. The cubs are taken from their mothers immediately after they're born. And the reason is, if they bond to the mothers, they become far less manageable and trainable. And the way they train these cubs is basically to try to train out of them the natural behaviors. You know, if you've ever watched kittens, those little kittens, they want to jump, scratch, bite, and that's part of learning to survive in the wild. So when they do that, you know, we've got an undercover video of the cubs being punched in the face and slapped and all kinds of things. So, so I'm not going to show you any of that, but you know, we've got it on record. We've got on record cubs being sick on these displays. They typically get ringworm because ringworm comes from not having clean surroundings. And you know, picture how these cubs live on the road in particular. They're taken into the mall, they get pet for all those hours, and then they're stuck back in a semi in a tiny box, and they're not cleaned properly. They don't get to sleep. You know, watch kittens. They sleep an enormous amount of time. They need to. These cubs don't get to sleep. As long as there's a customer, they'll wake them up. I'm going to play a 2-minute video for you, just examples of some of these cub petting exhibits.
But the 8-week-old cub I got to pet was obviously sick and barely moved during our visit. Another cub on display was missing a patch of fur and clearly not happy to have its photo taken. So where do these cubs come from? Joe Schreibvogel is the president of the company that operates that traveling tiger exhibit in the mall. He paid $25,000 for repeated animal welfare violations in 2006 and is currently under investigation by the USDA for the unexplained deaths of 23 tiger cubs at his park.
How did your 23 tigers die?
Bad formula.
He blames the death of those 23 cubs on bad milk formula. But both the formula manufacturer and the FDA, which tested it, told us the formula was safe.
They know to print off that many copies.
Nobody's cutting us up.
One hand per group.
It's sleeping? Oh my god, it looks like it's dead.
Oh, he's not very happy.
This little guy right here is actually 2 weeks old. You're not going to hurt him. Go ahead and take him back. Take him back, but he's missing.
Sitting there alone in a mall. And then once they are too big to use, and I'm just going to walk through some of these pictures. This is a cat living in a concrete, basically a garage. These are actual places that, in some cases, some of the cats we have came from. You can see these ramshackle, tiny places. None of the enrichment that you saw earlier, just stuck there with nothing to do. This is a guy in St. Petersburg who's got a whole bunch of animals. How close to a school?
He's right next door.
He's right next door to the school.
What was he keeping them for as adults? Like what was he hoping to do?
He takes them out and makes money. He'll take them out in a wagon and park it in front of a store. One day I caught him out there. The cats were laying there panting, and my car said it was 95 degrees with no shade. And a lot of these people, it's an ego thing. Look at me, I'm cool. I can be with the big cats. These are just other places. And the point of those is these are not the exceptions or the bad apples. this is how these people keep these cats all over the country. They're estimated to be somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000 tigers and between 10,000 and 20,000 total big cats, most of whom are living in these conditions. The accredited zoos, the zoos that meets the standard of the American Zoological and Aquarium Association, have about 250 tigers, and there are probably some hundreds in places we would consider to be good sanctuaries, and the rest of them live like this and are used like this. So that's the problem. Now, hopefully you would say to yourself, how can this be? Aren't there laws? And there are laws. And I'm not going to go through this whole thing today, but there are 3 main laws. And if you come down this way, under the Department of Agriculture, there's a division called APHIS. And their job, under the Animal Welfare Act, is to set minimum standards for the care of these animals. Part of the problem is that minimum seems to have been interpreted as just avoiding absolute horrible abuse. So, and the regulation doesn't work for a bunch of reasons. First of all, the standards themselves are so weak. For instance, Florida has one of the more generous laws. Remember when Carole was showing you the cage and said you can keep 2 tigers in here? That's 10 by 24. That's one of the most generous laws. USDA doesn't even have a size. They use language that says make normal postural movements. Well, what does that mean? So no one, and a lot of the USDA rules, they have things they call engineering standards, which basically there's a number to it, like a cage has to be 16 feet tall. Well, that, you know what to do as a licensee, and the inspector can measure. But many of their standards are referred to, remind me, as performance standards, which don't have a number, but are a judgment call. And different inspectors enforce them differently. The licensees typically don't know what they're supposed to do because, I mean, what does that mean? Make normal postural movements. Secondly, there are somewhere between 120 and 120 inspectors. There are, how many licensees of big cats?
I think it was over 3,000 of big cats, and it's approaching 10,000 facilities altogether, that because they have to regulate puppy mills and laboratories and all of those kinds of things as well.
So these 100 and 120 people have to run around inspecting puppy mills, research facilities, and all these people's backyards. Well, how many times can they get there? When there is a horrible place, what happens? They cite them, say, well, you got to fix this. Sometimes it gets fixed, sometimes it doesn't. Typically, in the worst places, and I'm talking about horrible places, these citations will go on for 5 or 6 years because USDA has only a handful of attorneys. They have only a handful of investigators. So there are very few cases they can actually take to court. So there's one place, for instance, that had 31 cats die because they didn't do the things they were cited for. They finally got taken to court. They're in court now. Court will take 2 years. And then there's a huge incentive on the part of USDA to settle because a trial is so expensive and takes up so much time. So for instance, there's one guy who in 4 years had 197 violations. And when they took him to court, they settled for $25,000, which he has bragged he makes in 1 weekend with his cub petting, and a 2-week suspension, which meant he couldn't have visitors for 2 weeks. And he's been operating all these years since. And think about what happens when an inspector comes. Typically, they do not do undercover work. They come to the gate and say, we're here to inspect. These places, if they don't want them to come in, don't let them in, and then they get cited for not letting them in. But they just get cited for not letting them in. When they come in, think about what they can see. They can tell if our barrier is not far enough from the cage, or if there's something obviously wrong with the cage, or if an animal looks terrible. Its ribs are showing, or it has open sores or something. Are they going to be able to see how these animals are treated? Absolutely not. These guys are not going to be punching the cubs in the face in front of the inspector. So there's a very limited amount that they can see. So I'm not criticizing USDA. They have these people are usually veterinarians, they have great educations, and many of them are as frustrated as we are. It's just their job is impossible. You cannot possibly regulate how people care for these cats. The Office of the Inspector General did an audit of USDA in 2010, And they found that the rules were unclear, that the rules were so subjective, as I described to you, that neither the exhibitor nor the inspector would know what to do, that the inspectors didn't know the rules, that the enforcement was very inconsistent. And I won't go into examples of that, but we've had examples where an inspector told us to do something, we do it, and we complain that one of these bad places is not doing it, and their inspector doesn't care. And USDA has rules, and then they'll sometimes issue what they call guidance, which is pretty meaningless because it's, they don't enforce it, they can't enforce it like a rule, but there's this whole administrative process where to take it and make it a rule is a long and painful process for them. So their guidance is you shouldn't be petting cubs under 8 weeks because their immune systems aren't developed and they can get sick easily, and they shouldn't pet them over 12 weeks because at that point they become dangerous. Their teeth and claws are big enough to become dangerous. So that created this 4-week window between 8 and 12 weeks, but it's not enforced at all. So they use them we've got video of them using them as young as 2 weeks and as old as 6 months with no citations for doing that. And we're now getting to a point where some of these places have become so big that the problem is if USDA shut them down, where do the animals go? We had one place go bankrupt in 2010 called Wild Animal Orphanage. They had 78 big cats and a total of 400 animals. And the hardest ones to place are the big cats and the big primates. And it took over a year, hundreds of thousands of dollars donated by IFAW and USDA work and the Global Federation of Sanctuaries to place all those cats. Arthur and Andre, who you have your pictures with, came from that place. So the first prong, I told you we had the 3-pronged effort. The first prong has been to go after the cup petting exhibits. So what we did is we engaged Susan.
Yay, Susan!
Whose job it was, whenever we found one of these people with cup petting at a mall or a casino or at a state fair, to call the place, say, look, this looks innocent on its face, but you may not understand this is really bad for these animals. Here how they live. Could I send you something? And we wrote up a long fact sheet about why this was bad. She would send it, follow up, and some of them actually got it. Some would say, you know what, this is horrible, we're not going to do this anymore. Frankly, most of them would say, well, they'd call the exhibitor, and the exhibitor would say, oh, they're just picking on me, and things like that. And say the USDA says I'm okay, which I've already explained to you doesn't mean anything. And in which case we would say, well, there's 2 issues. One is the animal care. If you don't care about that, there are a lot of people, there's a growing number of people who care about animals being treated well. And you may see people coming into your mall to pet the tigers, but what you don't see is all the people this offends. So we're going to show you that there are people that this offends. And then we would send out an email to people who signed up on our, as what we call advocats on our website to receive our alerts and say, would you please email this mall and let them know that you don't believe this should be done? Well, as our reputation has grown and our list of people signing up has grown, we got to a point where we could generate 1,000 to 2,000 emails. That's a lot of emails coming in saying you shouldn't be doing this. And so we would also contact the media and see if we could get media attention to the issue. And in some cases, without our doing anything, and occasionally with a little help from us, small protests arose in front of these venues. And we learned a lot from that because this was not something we knew how to do, but it doesn't take much of a protest to get some attention, particularly if it's grassroots, if people just went out there on their own, if it wasn't some big organized group. So the outcome of that work was, here's a few of the kind of media attention. And of course, you're all in the media. We can't predict how things will come out. At least we always would get attention to the issue. So this one, said thrills some, troubles others. This one, exotic animals inspire cross-country debate. This one we kind of like, big cats, big controversy, outcry over mall tiger exhibition. And then these were examples of a couple of the protests that went on, which would bring TV attention. And now how have these exploiters responded? Well, they have no arguments that resonate with the public to justify what they're doing. It's obviously selfish, either to have them as pets or to make money from them. And so their reaction was to attack us, both Big Cat Rescue, Carole personally, occasionally me personally. They would file bogus complaints with these agencies who are obligated to investigate every complaint. And it's gotten to the point where the USDA fellow will come and say, all right, I got another one. I have to go through it with you. I know none of it's true. And we've never been cited for any of the things that they ever complained about because none of them were true. But the outcome of all this has been we've gotten over 1,000 positive media impressions, the most important one being me in Glamour magazine. We have segments on Discovery Channel, Animal Planet, History Channel. We've had when people from CNN came out one time to film for, they had 2 hours, and 5 hours later they said, we have more than what we need. This is just too good. We can't stop. So we've gotten very well known that way. GFAS, the Global Federation of Animal Sanctuaries, which is the accrediting body that sets the standards. You're very welcome. I'll be happy to have you call Patty Finch, the executive director. She holds us out as the standard, both for animal care and financial management, and for doing advocacy work. Every year since we've been rated, we've gotten the Charity Navigator 4-star rating, which is not easy to get, and not very few people get it consistently. Carole mentioned to you that our YouTube channel, which is bigcattv.com, that has videos like the one I showed you, has gotten now 67 million views. And we're up now recently past 100,000 Facebook followers, all of which is geared to trying to spread the word about the things I'm telling you about today. So obviously their attacks have not been successful. It's actually been the opposite. One of them even tried to make his traveling show look like us. And he took, you can see my logo. He copied the part of our logo and stuck entertainment under it in lighter text so that it hardly appears at times. The snow leopard eyes were what was on the masthead of our website at the time. He started using a card saying Florida office with a number with our area code. And I started getting emails from around the country saying, hey, I thought you guys didn't do this. So we sued him in federal court, spent 2 years suing him, won $1 million judgment, which he cannot pay. So we were currently chasing him through bankruptcy court. He's filed bankruptcy personally and for his zoo. But there are circumstances under which your debts are not relieved by bankruptcy, one of which is if you lie sufficiently in your bankruptcy filings, which he has done. So we've already gotten his personal debts are not forgiven in bankruptcy, and we're working on the zoo debts.
Let me just add, Howard, one of the ways that we would find out, because he obviously was very secretive and tried to not let us know where he was going, this was the guy that took most of these cats to the malls. And so outside the marquee of a mall in Cincinnati, Ohio, there would be a big sign saying Big Cat Rescue here and the dates. And we have a national following now, so people would be horrified and they'd call us and they'd be like, what are you guys doing in Ohio with baby tigers? And we're like, it's not us. So, that's how we were able to find out and kind of track where he was going and learn that he was using posters and flyers and that kind of thing.
Yeah, in fact, when we went to the attorney we used to sue him, and I gave him all these emails from people around the country saying, wait a minute, I know you guys. He said, wow, you are really well known. I had no idea you were so well known. So the outcome of this was that we got the owners of over 200 malls to agree not to have cup petting, which has saved an enormous amount of misery. So if you all read the script, this is the part where you applaud. The second prong was to try to change the regulations, get USDA to disallow the cup petting, make a rule that said you can't do this kind of cup petting. And so I told you about the 8 and 12 weeks and the lack of enforcement. Back in the middle of 2011, we managed to get together with a number of the much bigger organizations, HSUS, World Wildlife Fund, Born Free, the International Fund for Animal Welfare in Washington, D.C.
The Someone Alter Foundation.
What happened?
You know about it?
I know the actor.
Yeah. Well, it's the actor, and he's the way that came about is he's from Louisiana, and there's a tiger. The poor tiger stuck in a truck stop in Louisiana, and one of his people called and said, "What can we do about this?" And we talked about that, but said there's more you could do. And actually, his person, a pro bono attorney, working for him, went to some professors she had in law school who helped us organize this meeting. So his group was a key factor in this. So we met, and everybody agreed to work on both the rulemaking and the federal bill, all working on it together, which was, hugely powerful. And so we worked for months, and I won't take you all through the detail, but we did an enormous amount of work, got 20 vets to sign on, and documented all of the, cases that we could find of using the cubs and why it was bad. And we went to a meeting in DC with USDA in January of 2012, and they were very cordial. They got all their senior people together to listen to us. So there's a big conference room, and we went around the room reviewing this. Things moved slowly in an agency setting, but the next step was that we filed what's called a formal petition. It's not a petition you sign. It's kind of like a court brief where you make your case to them, asking them to make a rule like this. And this thing is 70 pages long. It's packed with scientific backing for what we're saying. The 20 vets had signed on, and we submitted it on the anniversary of that Zanesville tragedy where the guy released the 56 cats and then killed himself. So that's when we filed it. The next step is, does USDA think well enough of it to say we ought to put it out for public comment? And that took time, but they just put it out for public comment 2 months ago, and the comment period is actually ending next week. And we have gotten over 15,000 comments, and we believe the vast, vast, vast majority of them are people agreeing with us. And all of these organizations put out to all of their followers, please go on the site and comment. And so the comment period will close now, and we've gotten also major groups like the American Zoo and Aquarium Association to comment favorably, along with the American Veterinary Medical Association. Now the timing, they can take a year or two to think about this, but we are very hopeful that the outcome will be that they ban the cub petting, and that creates it takes away one of the biggest incentives for breeding the cats, because if they can't make money petting the cubs, there's a lot less reason to breed the cats. The third prong is the federal bill, and what this bill would do is simply ban breeding and possession by private individuals. And you have, we would grandfather in existing owners, so we're not going to run around taking anybody's beloved cat from them, and it would be impractical too, because there's no place for them to go. But the people who are opposing the bill, the exhibitors, will go through the Congress office saying, oh, they're going to take my cat, which is a total lie. Or one of them is saying that we have reduced the USDA rules. That's absolutely not true. It says nothing about changing USDA rules. It just bans the breeding and possession. So we exempt the AZA accredited zoos. They're the only ones that are breeding a pure subspecies that has any conservation value. All the rest of these tigers are what are called generic or junk tigers. They are mixtures of subspecies like the Siberian and Bengal. Part of the reason to mix them is the more you mix them, the more likely you are to get a white tiger, which is more valuable. So none of them could ever be put in the wild or have any conservation value. And sanctuaries are exempted but also defined, because anybody can call themselves a sanctuary. Many of these bad places do. And what would happen is eventually there would be no need for sanctuaries, because if the breeding stops and the population dies out, we won't be getting calls to have cats. So the bills are in the House, it's Bill 1998, and the Senate 1381. You probably know that the federal government works in 2-year sessions, and one ended this last December. So in the session before, late in the session, we introduced our bill in the House and got up to 60 co-sponsors. And this is a process that can take a few years as you build support. And it wasn't introduced in the Senate until right before the election, when nobody was doing anything. It's been reintroduced now fairly recently. We're up to 82 co-sponsors in the House and just beginning to work in the Senate. Next week, we're having what's called a fly-in. We're bringing in a dozen of our supporters from around the country to Washington, D.C., who are in key districts. That means districts where congressmen or senators who are on the committees that these bills would have to hear are from. And generally, a constituent can get an appointment to go in and at least talk to the aides. And so we will go around with these folks to their Congress people, trying to get them to co-sponsor the bill. That's the process right now. You try to get enough co-sponsors to where the committees that have to hear the bill say, okay, there's a lot of co-sponsors, we're going to hear the bill. So That's happened. We're all going to fly to D.C. and then go around the halls of Congress having these meetings. So,
Sorry, what's considered to be a good amount of co-sponsors? Like, how many do you think that you need?
well, it depends on how receptive you think the committee is. And in the House, the committee we have to go to has some people that we think are not real fans. And so there we may have to get up over 200 before they can say, okay, there's so many, we can't ignore it. Because they can choose not to hear whatever they don't want to hear. But in the Senate, I don't think we would need as high a percentage before the committee would hear it. And committee chairmen have a great deal of say in what gets heard. So if your committee chairman is a supporter, you may not need many at all. So the goal here basically is to end the misery, to stop these cats living like I've shown you and being used for cub petting. In effect, when we say what our goal is to put ourselves out of business so that we don't get any more calls with abused animals. And the Body Shop has been a wonderful supporter. We did not have a generator to back up our freezers. If there had been a hurricane where we lost power for days, our meat would have spoiled. And you can't go down to the supermarket and buy 500 pounds of meat after a hurricane where everybody else is buying it. And so the Body Shop funded a generator that backs up the freezers that would allow us to survive a storm like that. Told you they have contributed to the solar panels that those solar panels run all of the tiger pools, the pumps, and all of the hose, the pumps for the hoses and wells to do all the cleaning of all those tigers. They have made us very kindly a beneficiary of the current Dragon Butter promotional event. They have built awareness and included us in their foundation annual report. And actually, the foundation CEO, they're a very people-oriented company, and they have an award. You guys can correct me if I don't remember this correctly, but they have their founder was named Anita, and they have the Anita Award for their outstanding people from around the world. And then they take these people on a trip to do special things. And so the CEO of the foundation, along with I think it was 6 Anita Award winners, came here, painted a cage, and worked at the sanctuary for 2 days, which was just a wonderful treat for us. So if you were to ask me how you can help, collectively, you have an audience of millions, far more than we can reach. And you've all heard the expression, the pen is mightier than the sword, and you guys have the pens. So, the Dragon Butter promotion is a really fun thing. If there's a way, as you write about that, to include that what we really need now is enough people going. We've set up a website, stopbigcatabuse.com, that makes it very easy for people to locate their representatives and just send them an email saying, please co-sponsor the bill. What we need is millions of people doing that so we get more co-sponsors. So, when you look at that cub petting video, if that touches you and you say that shouldn't happen, and you look at those pictures of how these cats are kept, and you want to help do something about it, that would be a way to do it. Most of you are much younger than I am, and I look like an old man to you up here with gray hair. At your ages, life centers more about looking forward and all this anticipation. At mine, it's, you look back and think about legacy and what your contribution was. And, I would love it if this was something you look back on years from now and said, part of your contribution was helping to stop this. Because I can tell you, when I look in the mirror in the morning, every morning I say, where did that 30-year-old go? And you're going to be surprised how quickly you're doing that. So thank you very much for your patience and alertness.
Howard, they might be interested to know when you talk about the issues of how big the business is in our country for the exotic animal trade, because they give perspective to what the problem is. Not just big cats, but our government's best guesstimate at the exotic animal trade is at least $2 billion every year in the United States. And probably, if that's a guesstimate, it could be double that. And around the world, over $20 billion. And that's everything from the reptiles to the big cats to the primates. So it's a huge business, and it's all being done for profit.
And that's the illegal part,
Absolutely.
Right? Not the legal part, which I've shown you. The trade in these animals. Okay, so
this website is for direct support to the bill.
Yes.
That's what this is for.
How do other Western countries handle this sort of problem?
Well, let me talk about that and states, because the trend is favorable. Gradually, country by country, they're saying, look, this is ridiculous. We shouldn't have these animals used in entertainment or owned privately. So one by one, countries are lining up. Carole knows it better than I do which ones. The same thing has been happening at the state level. Now, the problem at the state level is a number of states have passed a ban. There are about 7 or 8 states that still have no laws. Ohio was one of the ones that she talked about that had no laws, and then you have this tragedy, and Ohio passed one of the best laws. The problem with most of the laws is that they exempt people who have a USDA license. Well, the USDA license is a 1-page application, 9 questions. The hard questions are name and address, and used to be $40. I think maybe it's $60 or something. And there's no, and what you're saying is you're an exhibitor. But the same Office of the Investigator General that did the work I told you about did a sampling and found that of the people that had 4 or less big cats, 70% of them were just pet owners who went to get a USDA license to evade the state law. So a law that exempts USDA licensees is virtually ineffective, which is why, critically, our federal bill does not do that. So the trend around the world, and if you think back about how things have changed over time, today we take for granted civil rights and women voting, but if you really go through the history of the process, the early suffragettes were beaten and thrown in jail and considered nuts. The man Wilberforce in England, who led the battle to end slavery in England, was laughed at and then caricatured for years, and gradually built supporters to a point where it became accepted more broadly. And this has taken decades. And you tend to get kind of an exponential thing where it goes along slowly and then starts to go like this. And what we're now seeing in animal welfare is that start of exponential thing, where more and more people are getting it, and it's more and more, and the evidence of that is these state laws and countries making these decisions.
The larger, like the United Kingdom and all, they banned the private possession of these animals back in the 70s. So we are way, way behind them.
We have visitors. It's a national embarrassment. We have visitors who come from other countries, and they hear the stories you've heard today, and the reaction is literally, what is wrong with this country? How can you let this be?
I was interviewed for the National Broadcasting Network in Japan. They had seen one of our cute videos, and anyway, the short story is that they interviewed me through an interpreter, and it was like they were amazed, like, how do people in your country own lions and tigers? They couldn't even wrap themselves around it.
It's actually easier to buy like a cub here in America than it is to go to Humane Society and try to get a domestic kitten or a dog.
The brokers that you mentioned, that's an informal thing. Like, they're not official brokers, they're just people that somehow get the cats? Or is that an actual...
No, they're licensed.
They are licensed?
They're licensed to breed. Now, technically, to breed it, if it's an endangered species, which the tiger is, technically, you need to go to the other agency, the Fish and Wildlife Service, and get a permit to breed. So, but years ago, back in 1998, they created an exception for the generic tiger. So these people can just breed like crazy. And one of our efforts has been to get them to change that rule. We went through the same rulemaking process, went through the comment period, and now we've been waiting 2 years for them to
issue the
So if someone wants to get an exotic animal and they look up a broker, aren't they coming across the information about how horrible it is? Like, I'm just trying to figure out what's the disconnect between obviously someone who thinks that, claims to love animals and to the point where they want a tiger or something in their home, but how are they able to skip over the reality of that?
The same way people go through the drive-through lane at McDonald's and put on the blinders and don't look at factory farming. But you don't see what you don't want to see.
Well, and getting general awareness. You guys are the people who write, you're in the media. It's not easy to get 100% of the people to get something. So more and more are getting it. Also, but somebody who, part of what fosters the desire to have these animals is the cub petting. I took a newspaper clipping where there was a TV reporter at one of these cub petting events, and he turned to a little girl and said, "What do you think?" And she went, "I want one." And these people say that they're teaching about conservation and teaching people that they shouldn't want them as pets. But to stand there petting a cub saying you shouldn't have a cub as a pet is like me sitting here smoking a cigarette saying smoking is bad for you. I want to be special like you and do that. So now they may come across, our website gets something like 1.6 million visitors a year. So there are people coming who get to learn about this.
And a lot of people tell us, thank you. I was thinking about getting a Savannah cat, and then I read about it on your site. Or I was thinking about getting a tiger, and I read about it on your site. So we get a lot of those emails.
We get people who come out. Well, you think about all the things people do to try to get attention, whether it's things we do about how we look, or what car we drive, or it used to be what brand of cigarettes you smoked. And look at me, I'm really cool. I've got this tiger. We had one guy, one of the cougars here years ago was from a guy who he just found the little cougar was a babe magnet. You want to come see my little cougar?
And part is sadly exponential. If the regulations haven't prevented that, and so now you have so many people breeding so many tigers, so many thousands of tigers. You can buy lion and tiger cubs now for anywhere from $500 to $1,200. So if it becomes so affordable, then people that were never in the market 20 years ago to exploit an animal say, I can buy one now. It goes hand in hand.
Well, I think about the mixed message people get. We've got stuff out there, but when Jay Leno has somebody come on with a leopard on a leash, a few more people see that than see our website, unfortunately. And so now Siegfried and Roy. Everybody believes that Siegfried and Roy was conserving the white tiger. And I don't think because we didn't see Zabu, did you?
We did.
Oh, you did? Okay, I wasn't there for that. But, there's no species of white tiger. It shouldn't be bred. So, but you go down the street and ask people, most people will say, oh yeah, Siegfried and Roy, they were preserving the white tiger. So, basically, we need help from folks like you.
Do you guys write to producers and stuff when you see that on TV?
Yes. We'll send alerts. So if we see somebody with an ad, like right now, this month's advocate, what Susan does every month is she tries to find the 5 worst of those. And so if you look at our advocate, we call it our e-zine, our monthly newsletter, this one has 5 examples. So such and such actress was in a shot with this leopard cub. Please email.
Rihanna is in the current one right now. She was just in Africa and she was filmed with an adult leopard and holding a baby tiger cub. The Live with Kelly and Michael show, they just had a lynx kitten and I forget what the other one was, maybe a serval kitten on the show from the San Diego Zoo. You think, oh, San Diego Zoo. And yes, they might do a good job at the zoo, but you don't need to take these animals out. The stress for them being taken from their natural environment, put on a plane, taken there, people, clapping, cheering for them. It's unbelievable stressful. And just to get their boost up the TV ratings.
And if it's a corporation, like in this one,
Subway
had an ad
with a
white tiger.
And so we've asked people to email executives at Subway saying you shouldn't be doing this to create that awareness.
Oh, I saw
Oh,
that.
yeah. I actually saw that right before I came here, and I was like,
It's on the woman's desk in an office.
Well, and maybe after your day here, you look at that differently.
There are places, especially, right in Los Angeles, that will rent a tiger cub to you for a day or for a couple weeks for a movie. It all depends. It's rampant once you realize you get conscious to what you're seeing. Wait a minute, where did that tiger come from? It's not a Photoshop, tiger. That's a real tiger that they brought onto a set to make a Subway commercial.
So we'll have more time to talk at dinner. You're the first group that ever stayed awake for my entire talk.
Thank you for watching the Cat Chat Show. You can find us at catchatshow.com, and there you can find links to previous shows, also to audio podcasts that you can subscribe to in iTunes and at Libsyn.com. Again, that's catchatshow.com. Thank you. Bye-bye.